The color drained from Kira Everett's face as the entire sales floor fell silent, every eye trained on her while the regional manager's voice echoed through the open office. "We need people who can actually meet their targets. Clean out your desk. You're done." "But Kira's voice caught, her portfolio of client notes clutched tightly against her chest, as though it could shield her from the humiliation burning through her body. 23 coworkers watched in stunned silence as she stood frozen beside her cubicle. "Now, Miss Everett," the manager added, his voice carrying deliberately across the floor. "Unless you'd like security to escort you out." From the executive conference room overlooking the sales floor, Mason Briggs watched the scene unfold. He'd only stepped in to finalize acquisition details with Silverman Tech's board, not to witness someone's career implode. Yet something about the woman's dignified posture, even as her world collapsed, kept his attention. She didn't cry, scream, or cause a scene. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and began methodically gathering her belongings. The executive beside him chuckled. "That's Walsh for you. Public executions keep everyone else in line." Mason didn't respond, his eyes still fixed on the woman carefully placing framed photos into a cardboard box. As CEO of Briggs Innovations, he'd built his company on a completely different philosophy. People weren't disposable assets to be humiliated for effect. "Should we continue with the acquisition timeline?" Another executive prodded. Mason turned from the window, his mind already working beyond the deal he'd come to make. "I think we're done here, and not just with today's meeting." The room fell silent as Mason gathered his papers. "Gentlemen, Briggs Innovations won't be acquiring Silverman Tech. I've seen everything I need to know about how this company operates." 20 minutes later, Mason stood in the lobby, having ended $15 million worth of negotiations in less than 5 sentences. He wasn't usually impulsive in business, but sometimes gut instinct served him well. As he waited for his driver, the elevator doors opened, and out walked the woman from upstairs, her box of belongings balanced awkwardly in her arms. Up close, he could see the tight control in her expression, the determined set of her jaw fighting against the slight tremble of her lips. Her eyes were clear but reddened around the edges. "Excuse me," she said politely, trying to navigate around him with her unwieldy box. "Let me help you with that," Mason offered, reaching for the box. "I've got it," she insisted, gripping it tighter. A small potted plant tilted precariously near the edge. "I'm sure you do," Mason replied. "But sometimes accepting help doesn't mean you're not capable." Her eyes narrowed slightly, assessing him. After a moment, she allowed him to take the box. "Thank you, I'm just headed to the parking garage." "So am I," Mason said, falling into step beside her. "Rough day," a humorless laugh escaped her. "You could say that." "Nothing like getting fired in front of your entire department to make a Tuesday memorable." "I saw what happened," Mason admitted. "It was handled poorly." "That's corporate life," she replied, reaching for her box as they approached the garage entrance. "One day you're exceeding expectations, the next you're a cautionary tale because a major client pulled their account through no fault of your own." "Kira Everett," he read from the nameplate sitting atop her belongings. "I'm Mason Briggs." Recognition flickered across her face, followed by wariness. "Briggs Innovations, you're not exactly flying under the radar these days, Mr. Briggs. Mason, please." He held onto the box a moment longer. "What will you do now?" She shrugged, the casual gesture contradicting the tension in her shoulders. "Update my resume, call my contacts, pretend this was all part of some grand career plan. Or," Mason said, an idea forming, "you could come work for me." Kira's eyebrows shot up. "Is this some kind of joke?" "I'm serious. I need someone with experience in client relations for a new division. Your former manager just gave you quite the recommendation. Anyone who cares that much about their client portfolio deserves consideration." "You don't know anything about me," she protested. "I could be terrible at my job." "I'm an excellent judge of character," Mason said, "and I recognize resilience when I see it. Come to my office tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. We'll talk properly." Before she could respond, his driver pulled up alongside them. Mason carefully placed her box in her arms. "The choice is yours, Miss Everett. but I think we might have a lot to offer each other. As his car pulled away, Mason watched through the rear window as Kira stood motionless in the parking garage, her expression a mix of confusion and cautious hope. He hadn't planned on recruiting anyone today, and he certainly hadn't expected to be so intrigued by a woman he'd barely met. The next morning, Kira stood outside the gleaming Briggs Innovations headquarters, questioning her sanity. Part of her suspected the job offer had been either a bizarre prank or misplaced pity. Yet here she was, in her best interview suit, 15 minutes early. The receptionist smiled warmly when Kira gave her name. "Mr. Briggs is expecting you, 15th floor." The elevator whisked her upward, giving her time to take deep breaths and remind herself that even if this was just a courtesy meeting, at least she tried. The doors opened onto a bright, open workspace that hummed with energy nothing like Silverman's sterile, tension-filled environment. "Miss Everett," a young assistant approached. "I'm Nicole. Mr. Briggs asked me to show you to his office." Mason Briggs stood as she entered, his 6-foot frame making the spacious corner office feel suddenly smaller. In the daylight, without the shock of public humiliation clouding her perception, Kira took in details she'd missed yesterday: the intensity of his blue eyes, the confident but not overbearing presence, the subtle smile lines that softened his otherwise serious expression. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "Thank you for taking me seriously." "Thank you for the invitation," Kira replied carefully, "though I'm still not entirely sure why I'm here." "Please sit." Mason gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Coffee? No, thank you." She sat, smoothing her skirt nervously. "Mr. Briggs Mason," she corrected. "I appreciate whatever this is, but I don't need charity. If yesterday was just you feeling sorry for me, I don't do charity hires," he interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "I'm building something important here, and I need the right people. What I saw yesterday was someone who cared deeply about their work, who maintained dignity under fire, and who, according to your portfolio that I glimpsed, keeps meticulous records of client relationships." Kira blinked, surprised by his observations. "You noticed all that. I notice everything when it comes to potential in people." Mason leaned forward. "Here's what I'm proposing. Briggs Innovations is launching a client experience division that will transform how we maintain relationships with our partners. I need someone who understands the human element of business, not just numbers and contracts." He passed her a folder containing a detailed job description and compensation package. Kira scanned it, her eyes widening at the salary figure nearly double what she'd been making. "This can't be right," she said. "It is," Mason confirmed. "I believe in paying for value." "The question is, can you provide that value, Miss Everett?" Kira studied him, searching for the catch. Finding none, she straightened her shoulders. "I can, but I'd like to understand why you were at Silverman yesterday in the first place." A smile tugged at his lips she'd impressed him by asking. "I was finalizing an acquisition, or I was supposed to be. After witnessing their management style, I walked away from the deal." "You walked away from buying Silverman?" Kira was stunned. "That's a multi-million-dollar company." "It is. And now it's one with a significant problem ahead, since several of their major technology contracts were contingent on our acquisition." He shrugged. "I don't partner with companies that treat people as disposable, so this job offer it's not related to Silverman." "Only in that I might not have met you otherwise." His expression grew serious. "I'm offering you this position because I think you'll excel at it, nothing more, nothing less." 2 hours later, Kira walked out of Briggs Innovations with an employment contract, a start date for the following Monday, and a sense of disbelief that her catastrophic Tuesday had somehow led to the biggest opportunity of her career. She found herself smiling for the first time in days. By Friday evening, after a whirlwind week of apartment hunting and wrapping up loose ends, Kira's phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "This is Mason. Hope you don't mind, I got your number from HR, just checking if you're all set for Monday." Kira stared at the message, surprised that the CEO would personally reach out. She hesitated before responding, "All set, looking forward to it." His reply came quickly, Excellent. By the way, we have a team tradition. New hires choose where we go for lunch on their first day. Think about it. On Monday morning, Kira arrived at Briggs Innovations 30 minutes early, her stomach fluttering with a mix of excitement and nerves. Nicole, the assistant she'd met before, was already at her desk. "Morning, Kira. Ready for your first day?" Nicole handed her a security badge. "Mason asked me to get you settled. Your office is this way." Office? Kira had expected a cubicle at best. Nicole led her to a bright corner space with windows overlooking the city. "Mason wants the client experience team to have proper meeting spaces. You're the first hire, so you get to help shape everything." The morning passed in a blur of orientation meetings, paperwork, and introductions to key team members. Despite the information overload, Kira noticed something distinctive about Briggs Innovations. People genuinely seemed to enjoy working there. Conversations were animated, laughter echoed down hallways, and not once did she see the tense, fearful expressions that had been commonplace at Silverman. At noon, Mason appeared in her doorway. "Ready for that lunch tradition I mentioned?" "Absolutely," Kira smiled, grabbing her purse. "I've chosen a place if that's still the plan." "It is. Where are we headed?" "Luca's Bistro on 7th, she said, watching his expression. "Is that okay?" Mason's eyes lit up. "Excellent choice. It's one of my favorites, actually." "Mine too," Kira admitted. "Their risotto is unbeatable." As they walked through the office, Kira noticed the respectful nods Mason received, not the fearful deference she'd observed with executives at Silverman, but genuine regard. Outside, the September air was crisp and pleasant. "Mind if we walk?" Mason asked. "It's only a few blocks." "Not at all." They fell into step beside each other, and to Kira's surprise, the conversation flowed easily. Mason asked thoughtful questions about her background, listening intently to her answers. By the time they reached the restaurant, Kira realized she'd learned as much about him as he had about her: his passion for technology that helped people, his close relationship with his younger sister, his love of sailing. "Table for Briggs," Mason told the host, who immediately led them to a corner booth. "You had a reservation?" Kira asked, "but you didn't know where I'd choose." Mason smiled sheepishly. "I may have made reservations at the 5 places nearest the office, just in case." "That's," Kira laughed. "Extremely thorough." "I like to be prepared," he said, opening his menu. "Though I already know what I'm having. Let me guess, the risotto?" "Guilty." His eyes met hers over the menu, and something shifted in the air between them. For a fleeting moment, it felt less like a boss taking a new employee to lunch and more like something else entirely. The moment passed as their server arrived, but throughout lunch, Kira found herself increasingly aware of Mason as a man, not just as her employer. The way his hands moved expressively when he spoke about technology. The deep timbre of his laugh when she shared a story about her disastrous first job. The genuine interest in his eyes when she described her ideas for client engagement. As they finished their meal, Mason's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned slightly. "Everything okay?" Kira asked. "Just a reminder about the Weston presentation tomorrow. Our technology director is out sick, and I'm not thrilled with the current slide deck." He pocketed his phone. "Nothing for you to worry about on your first day." "What's wrong with the presentation?" Kira asked. Professional curiosity piqued. Mason hesitated, then pulled out his tablet. "See for yourself. Too technical, not enough focus on actual client benefits." Kira scrolled through the slides, her mind already reorganizing the information. "May I?" she asked, fingers hovering over the edit button. "Please," Mason nodded. For the next 20 minutes, they sat side by side in the booth, restructuring the presentation. Kira was in her element, translating complex technical information into compelling client benefits. Mason contributed insights about Weston's specific concerns, their eyes meeting occasionally as they built on each other's ideas. "This is exactly why I hired you," Mason said finally, studying the transformed presentation. "You instinctively understand what matters to clients." "It's just how my mind works," Kira replied, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. She could smell his cologne, subtle and masculine. "Well, your mind works impressively," he said, his voice softer. For a moment neither spoke, caught in an unexpected current of attraction. Mason cleared his throat, breaking the spell. We should probably head back. Outside, the afternoon had turned chilly, clouds gathering overhead. They were halfway back to the office when the skies opened, rain pouring down suddenly and fiercely. Come on. Mason grabbed Kira's hand instinctively, pulling her toward the nearest awning. They ducked under it, laughing and breathless, rain dripping from their clothes. So much for the pleasant walk back, Kira said, pushing wet hair from her face. I should have checked the weather, Mason replied, his hand still holding hers. When he realized, he gently released it, but the brief contact left Kira's skin tingling. I don't mind a little rain, she said, trying to ignore the fluttering in her stomach. This was her boss, she reminded herself firmly. Her very attractive, surprisingly thoughtful boss who had just given her an incredible opportunity. Mason flagged down a taxi, holding the door for her. As they rode back to the office in comfortable silence, Kira stole glances at his profile, trying to reconcile the powerful CEO with the man who just shared risotto and rain with her. Both versions were undeniably appealing. The next 4 weeks passed in a productive blur as Kira built the foundation of the client experience division. She hired 2 team members, developed protocols, and began meeting with key clients. Mason gave her remarkable autonomy while remaining accessible whenever she needed guidance. They fell into a rhythm of weekly strategy sessions that often extended into working dinners. During these meetings, the line between professional and personal gradually blurred as conversations drifted from business to books they'd read, places they'd traveled, and perspectives on everything from politics to pizza toppings. Kira found herself looking forward to these evenings more than she cared to admit. There was something exhilarating about matching wits with Mason, who challenged her thinking while clearly valuing her insights. She couldn't remember ever connecting with someone on so many levels. For his part, Mason found himself inventing reasons to seek Kira's input on matters beyond her division. Her fresh perspective and straightforward approach had already improved several company initiatives. But more than her professional contributions, he found himself drawn to her laugh, the animated way she spoke about things she cared about, her resilience and integrity. On a Friday evening in late October, they were the last ones in the office, reviewing client feedback reports in Mason's office. Outside, the city lights twinkled against an early dusk. I think we've done enough for 1 week, Mason said, leaning back in his chair. These numbers are excellent, by the way. Client satisfaction is up 12% since you came on board. Kira smiled, pleased by the recognition. It's a team effort. A team you built, he reminded her. You've exceeded every expectation, Kira. Something in his tone made her look up, finding his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent warmth spreading through her chest. The office felt suddenly smaller, more intimate in the soft evening light. I should probably go, she said softly, though she made no move to leave. It's getting late. Have dinner with me, Mason said. Before she could respond, he added, not as your boss. As a man who would very much like to spend time with you outside these walls. Kira's heart raced. Mason, this is complicated. You're my employer. I know, he acknowledged, and I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't think what's happening between us is worth navigating that complexity. Is something happening between us? She asked, though they both knew the answer. Mason stood and walked around his desk until he was standing before her. You tell me. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings that had been building for weeks. Kira knew the professional thing would be to maintain boundaries, to walk away and preserve the working relationship they'd established. But she couldn't deny the connection that had formed something rare and potentially wonderful. Yes, she admitted finally, something is happening. But I've worked too hard to be seen as someone who succeeds through personal connections. I understand that concern, Mason said seriously. What if we keep this completely separate from work? No one at the company needs to know until or unless we decide this is something real. Kira considered his words. And if it doesn't work out, then we're both adults who can continue to work together professionally, he said, though the thought of not exploring what was between them seemed increasingly impossible to him. "Okay," Kira said finally, a smile spreading across her face. "Dinner, not as boss and employee, just Mason and Kira." The following evening, Mason picked her up at her apartment, deliberately choosing a restaurant across town where they were unlikely to encounter colleagues. When Kira opened her door, he momentarily lost his train of thought. She wore a simple blue dress that accentuated her eyes, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. "You look beautiful," he said sincerely. Kira took in his charcoal sweater and dark jeans, a striking change from his usual business attire. "You clean up pretty well yourself when you're not being CEO." The restaurant was intimate and elegant, with candlelight casting a warm glow over their table. Without the context of work, their conversation flowed in new directions: childhood memories, dreams deferred, lessons learned from past relationships. "I haven't dated much in the past few years," Mason admitted over dessert. "Building the company took most of my time and energy." "I understand that," Kira nodded. "My last relationship ended because he couldn't understand why my career mattered so much to me. He wanted someone who would prioritize his goals over her own." "That's not what I want," Mason said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I admire your ambition. It's part of what draws me to you." The sincerity in his eyes made her breath catch. "What else draws you to me?" she asked softly. "Your resilience, your honesty, the way you light up when you're passionate about an idea." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "And I've been wanting to kiss you since that rainy day after your first lunch." Kira felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I've thought about that too," she confessed. After dinner, they walked along the riverfront, the city's skyline reflecting in the dark water. When Mason slipped his hand into hers, it felt natural, right? They stopped at a quiet overlook, the gentle sound of water lapping against the embankment the only sound. "Kira," Mason said, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his features were softened, his usual commanding presence replaced by something more vulnerable. She stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. "Yes." His hands came up to gently frame her face, his eyes searching hers for any hesitation. Finding none, he lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened as Kira wound her arms around his neck, responding with equal fervor. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I've been waiting to do that for weeks." "Was it worth the wait?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. He answered by kissing her again, his arms wrapping around her waist to pull her closer. Over the following months, they navigated their dual relationship with careful attention to boundaries. At work, they maintained professional distance, with only Nicole, who managed Mason's calendar, aware of their personal connection. After hours and on weekends, they discovered a profound compatibility that went beyond professional respect or physical attraction. Mason showed Kira his world sailing on his boat, charity galas where he introduced her simply as Kira with no workplace context, quiet evenings at his lakeside home where they talked for hours. Kira, in turn, shared her passions: community theater performances she participated in, her favorite hidden bookshop cafes, weekend hiking trails she discovered. 4 months into their relationship, as they prepared for Briggs Innovation's annual holiday party, they faced a decision. "Everyone will be watching you," Kira said as she adjusted Mason's tie in his living room. "If we arrive together or if you pay special attention to me." "I know," he said, covering her hands with his. "But I'm tired of pretending we're just colleagues at work, unless you're not ready." Kira considered the question seriously. Her department was now firmly established, her team respected throughout the company. She'd proven herself on her own merits. "I'm ready," she decided, "but let's not make a big announcement, just be ourselves and let people figure it out." The party was held at an elegant downtown hotel, the ballroom transformed into a winter wonderland. When Mason and Kira arrived together, a few curious glances were exchanged, but the significance wasn't immediately apparent. As the evening progressed, however, the natural intimacy between them, a hand at the small of her back, the way they gravitated toward each other across the room, Their easy laughter together made the situation clear to observant eyes. Near midnight, Mason clinked his glass for the traditional CEO holiday toast. After thanking everyone for their contributions to the company's most successful year yet, he paused, his eyes finding Kira's in the crowd. "I'd also like to acknowledge that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected moments," he said. "4 months ago, I met someone who has changed my perspective on what matters most. She reminds me daily that behind every business success are the human connections that truly enrich our lives." Whispers rippled through the room as people connected the dots. Kira felt her cheeks warm, but the genuine smile she gave Mason left no doubt about her feelings. Later, as they slow danced beneath twinkling lights, Mason whispered, "Was that too much?" "It was perfect," she assured him. "Though I think we're officially the company gossip now, let them talk," he murmured against her hair. "I'm exactly where I want to be." As winter melted into spring, their relationship deepened. Any initial workplace awkwardness faded as colleagues observed that their professional dynamic remained unchanged. Kira continued to challenge Mason's ideas when necessary, and he respected her department's autonomy. On the anniversary of the day they'd met, the day Kira had been so publicly fired, Mason suggested a weekend getaway to the coast. They walked barefoot along the beach at sunset, the waves gently lapping at their ankles. "It's hard to believe it's been a year," Kira reflected. "That day felt like the worst of my life when it was happening." "And now," Mason asked, squeezing her hand. "Now I see it was actually the beginning of everything good," she said, smiling up at him. "Funny how life works." Mason stopped walking, turning to face her. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, how one moment can change everything. If I hadn't been in that conference room that day, if I hadn't seen how gracefully you handled yourself in that terrible situation." He took a deep breath. "It makes me realize how precious those turning points are." Kira's heart quickened as Mason reached into his pocket, then knelt in the wet sand before her. "Kira Everett, that day I offered you a new job and a new beginning. Today, I'm asking if you'll share a new future with me, all of it, every day, every moment." He opened a small velvet box, revealing a stunning emerald-cut diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Kira's vision as joy exploded through her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." Mason slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as waves crashed around their feet and their laughter carried across the empty beach. 6 months later, they married in an intimate ceremony attended by close friends and family. Nicole served as Kira's maid of honor, having become a dear friend as well as a trusted colleague. Mason's sister, Emma, who had grown close to Kira, stood beaming beside them. At the reception, Mason surprised Kira by announcing a new Briggs Innovations initiative, a foundation that would provide mentorship and career development for professionals facing unexpected job transitions. "Sometimes people just need someone to recognize their potential," he said, his eyes finding Kira's across the room. "Someone who sees their value when they're at their lowest point." As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Kira rested her head against Mason's chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Beyond words," she replied. "Who would have thought that losing my job in the most humiliating way possible would lead to finding everything I never knew I wanted?" "I knew the moment I saw you gathering your things with such dignity," Mason confessed. "Something told me you were extraordinary." "And I thought you were just a kind stranger," she teased. "Little did I know you were a CEO with a hero complex." Mason laughed, spinning her in a graceful turn. "Not a hero complex, just a man who recognized something rare and beautiful when he saw it." As evening faded into night, surrounded by loved ones celebrating their union, Kira reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her here. From public humiliation to profound happiness, from professional crisis to personal fulfillment, all because one man had seen possibility where others saw failure. Life's darkest moments, she realized, sometimes contain the seeds of its greatest joys. All you needed was the courage to keep going and perhaps, if you were very lucky, Someone who believed in your future even when you couldn't see it yourself.